So today's topic are lessons learned from Train the Trainer. We're going to talk about the fact that when I went live with my Train the Trainer courses, as I planned them out, when I actually facilitated them, a lot of them turned out completely different.
Well, how about that? And you're a seasoned instructional designer. So you would think, right, I'm going to do this. I know how to do this. All I have to do is deliver this and everything's going to be fine. And what you find out is, okay, well, maybe, but maybe not. And no matter how much analytics you've done or anything else, there's still the opportunity for things to creep in. So populations show up and they're in a bad mood, or, materials aren't developed the way you think they should or whatever. And I think the important thing, just kind of as a premise when we talk about train a trainer really is part of instructional design. Whether you call it a pilot program, whether you call it this or call it that, this whole notion of every time that you implement something, you look at it for the opportunities to make it better. And I think that's what you probably found as you were doing train a trainer is, I put together this great program, but I actually got out there and stood in front of these learners and something changed. And it now makes you a better designer, first of all. But second of all, it just shows you the intricacy and the complexity of all the things we do in learning design. It's not just common sense. It's not just this or that. This whole notion of this chaos has to make sense in the end for the student, the end user. And I don't know, Denise, is that what you found out? I was like, wow. I didn't know that was going to happen.
Yeah, because on paper, I'm a planner, okay? And you taught me that.
Yes, you are.
I am a planner.
I created a monster.
You created a monster.
I'm okay with that, yeah.
I restructured pretty much 15 courses to make it my own, as you were the person who said, make these courses your own. So that's exactly what I did. I talked with students. I talked with you. I did my research, my due diligence, and I came to the table with 15 newly designed courses that I thought, okay, I think this is good. And then day one, first course, right? It's an 8-hour course. I had stuff planned according to Gagne's 9 events of instruction. That's my model. That's the one I go to. And everything was planned out. I thought I had enough time, this and that. Oh, these are going to be great topics. These are great learning objectives.
Surprise.
We're going to be able to follow these Gagne's 9 events of instruction to a T. It's going to be great. And then the first hour and a half of each class, it turned out, was this major discussion and this wonderful discovery session where in that hour, I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, everything I had planned, I have to throw out of the window because these students are taking me on a whole different journey that I think will be much more fulfilling for them if I follow their trajectory. And that was what happened to me this year. I ran free.
It happens to all of us. See, don't feel bad about that, because this is really important, Denise. As us, as designers, and if you're watching this, you're just starting in design, or maybe you're seasoned, have more experience than all of us together. The notion of there being a package that goes as planned, sometimes that happens, not very often, to be honest about it. You usually get pretty close the more you do it. You get 90%, 95%. I've always said if you get to 90%, you're a winner. You're never going to get 100. Yeah. But what it points out is that it takes a lot of work to do this well. And sometimes when we think we're going to be the teacher, the instructor, the facilitator, we design something differently than we would if we're going to hand it off. So one of the rules that I've always had, and you had this when you took grad classes with me, is design it as if you're not going to teach it. Design it as if you're going to hand it off and never see it again once it becomes a package and is out in distribution or implementation. It changes your complete mindset about things. And I don't know if this is part of your discovery in this particular situation, but what you find out is, okay, if I'm in front of the group, I can sing and dance and make anything work. And most good facilitators can. You can say, okay, Chuck, I want you to teach on a loaf of bread for the next 8 hours. And I can get up there and I can give you the whole history of bread, right? I could do whatever I do because I just have lots of experience facilitating and teaching. It's not that I do it well, I've just done it a lot. But if you're designing with that, So what happens is you think, okay, well, I'm teaching it, so I don't have to worry too much about detail here. I don't have to worry too much about timing there because, a half hour, I can make that work. And so I don't know if that was one of the lessons learned that you had from this experience, but that's the lesson learned that I often got early in my career was do not design it as if you were going to teach it.
And Chuck, you just bringing that up brings up a really important point that at times, I will be honest, in my journey developing these courses, I kind of forgot about that aspect. I literally,
well, you're not the only one.
I was so enmeshed in, I want this to be such a positive learning experience for all of these folks that are coming here from all across the country for a week. Yeah. And I knew I was going to be the one facilitating these courses as well. So I kind of went in with the dual lens of designing and facilitating. And
yeah.
I really admire and respect what you just reminded me of. And I hope that those people who are listening right now to this take this away from this video. Design it as though you are not going to actually be the one facilitating this, so that you can hand this off to somebody else and it's going to make sense.
So the other part of this too, Denise, is if you are actually going to be implementing and teaching yourself, then have somebody else teach it in front of you. Do a tabletop. If you've got a group of people, if you have a design team, you just happen to end up being the ones going to facilitate, do a tabletop. If I was going to teach something, I always had somebody else look at something.
Oh, I like that.
And many times, if I didn't have that team, I would just ask someone that maybe knew nothing about instructional design if something made sense. So, a Chuck story, I always have to have Chuck stories, right? So we were given an assignment to do a training session, a 3-hour training session was going to go across the entire United States, to every congressional district in the United States. And they gave us approximately 2 weeks to put this together before it went into distribution. So we had to design a 3-hour training. We had to put together a trainer session for over 200 people who were going to go out and do what they do. And so this was over Thanksgiving. And I had my family in for Thanksgiving, even though I had to go in and work on this. I still came home later in the afternoon for dinner. And I had family members there that knew nothing about instructional design. They had no idea what I did for a living, didn't care really. It wasn't their world, right? So I gave it to them. I gave them this entire 3-hour training. And I said, look through this and see if it makes sense to you. Could you pick this up and train this?
Meanwhile, they're eating a turkey leg. And
get rid of the dressing and the stuffing and the rest of it. But if you're a one-person shop, and many of us are on different occasions, depending on the particulars of what you're doing. There's lots of things that I design and teach myself, and that's fine. But I always ask for that second opinion.
Yes. I mean, in theory, it's a wonderful idea to be able to pilot test these things. And what do you say to somebody, though, like myself, who maybe, so I was really in charge of putting together, redesigning 15 classes that I was going to be teaching for this instructor certification program. And time was not on my side. What advice do you give to somebody who's in that boat?
Do a tabletop with yourself. I mean, just read through a lot of things early on in design careers that go south are timing. So as you recall, when I was teaching you in grad school, I said, whatever you think your course is, double it, because that's how long it's going to be. And sometimes triple it, just depending, because we don't allow for things. We don't allow for questions. We don't allow for long discussions. We don't allow for just transitional pieces. So like if you take a break and you don't figure that into your 4 hours or 8 hours. So if you think about it, 8-hour course is at most 7 hours by the time you put breaks and whatever. The other thing is just timing wise, do you have people in the beginning of a course to come in and say hello, and do you have, the welcoming video from HR and everything else that, sometimes professional environments you see? Have you allowed for all those things? And many times, no, I got an 8-hour course. Oh, yeah. Oh, breaks? What do you mean you're going to take a half hour to begin? And so I would do a tabletop and check timing. Make sure timing is right. Make sure transitions are right. Make sure your materials are there. Are your decks ready to go visually? Have you checked your equipment? All the things that you would normally put into a design plan. But just more specifically, don't rely on your background and your experience in each particular case. Get a second opinion. And train a trainer is a perfect environment to find this out, because you think you're teaching them, but in the end, you probably get schooled more than they do. I mean, they're going to say, well, okay, what do I do in this situation? Well, I hadn't thought about that situation.
Indeed. So the folks that I was teaching, and this audience because I took over your role, they are just so wonderful. I love these folks. And what I love is, oh yeah, what I love about this particular audience is they are so willing to have these really in-depth discussions and bring their experience to the table. And so what I found is I overplanned the content, okay? But I did allow, I knew that there were going to be just some major discussions going on because I just know these folks. I've been teaching them for 3 years now. I have that experience with them, and I know that they just are very colorful in their dialogue. They no holds bar, and I love that because they really contribute to the overall environment of the classroom. So I did thankfully filter in knowing that for each thing I was going to present to them, we were going to have like a half-hour discussion afterwards at the very least, and then a break would ensue. So I did kind of plan that in, which thankfully that actually helped work to the advantage. But a lot of these wonderful, rich discussions that happen were their experience. They would share their experiences, and everybody I could just see. It's wonderful watching now.
Next time you do this, you're going to build that into your design in a different way. Yeah. And the other thing you have to remember about training a trainer is sometimes you're actually training trainers to be trainers. It's not just about content. It's not just about this or that. It's about presentation skills. It's about communication skills. It's about knowing when to win. And it's different. It's a different kind of a texture to it. So once you work with a group for a while, then you appreciate where they're at. So 15 courses with the same people, by the second time, third time through, you know what the deal was. They knew what the deal was. You knew where the weaknesses were in terms of their implementation and facilitation skills. And you could focus more on the content. But if you're doing this cold turkey and it's a trainer for people you never worked with, then you got to fall back again and say, I can't make the assumption that they can teach. I can't make the assumption that they can lead conversations or step away when there needs to be a discussion. And those are the kind of things that complicate trainer as opposed to pilot. Pilot is generally just, okay, here's the course. Trainer is, okay, I got a whole set of skills I got to get these folks up to, or at least assure myself that they have those skills. So it's kind of a different scenario, but it all goes back to the same thing. It's just don't assume that you're a one-person show. Don't always trust what you see in the mirror because it's not always accurate. And so just be aware of that, be okay with it. And I'd like to say it's a maturation issue, but it isn't because I go through the same challenges. This is just what this is. And if you're okay with that and you don't think there's any issues, okay, well, I just need to get them from here to there. That's my job. And that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah, indeed. And now this is my 3rd year with this program. Each cohort is so different from the other. So
they're all different.
And I find, and so that makes it hard to plan though, year to year. Like, okay, year 2, just say they were experts at such and such, whatever was planned. And then the next cohort comes in year 2 and you're like, oh shoot, I have to start from square one. Or wow, they are super advanced. Like nobody needs to know this information.
This is where, when I talk about chaos theory and instructional design, learning design, people roll their eyes. This is all chaos theory, okay? There's all these individual points of light, whether they're our students, whether they're our content points or whatever they are, and they don't always come in together the way that you think they should. There is chaos in the learning universe. So just like trying to predict where a hurricane's going, trying to predict where your learners are going, it's not always the easiest thing to do, and it's because of chaos. You have to be okay with the fact that each of these different points of light is a different place at a different time, and that could be 2 seconds away, and it's different. So cohort to cohort, group to group, class to class, year to year, there are going to be differences, and good instructional designers step back and say, okay, here's the space I've allowed for these differences.
Now, let me ask you a question, because what I ended up doing when I planned these 15 courses was I overplanned. of course, right?
Of
I
course you
over
do. Right?
planned. And then, so that knowing that I knew that I was going to be taking a lot of stuff out, but I over planned in case I had like superstar, like just not that everybody's a superstar in my eyes. But what I mean is, everybody already knew this information before I even had to teach it. Imagine you have a cohort like that. Then, you're going to overplan because you're going to need to have a lot more content to challenge them. Every course I developed for this particular program, I developed it, keeping in mind that I may have a cohort that we are like really at the beginning stages of something, or I may have that same cohort maybe at the middle, or they may be like really advanced as a group, as a whole. You're always going to have your individual people.
And the
who
individuals are going to be, outliers on each side of the
exactly.
course.
So I planned each course keeping that in mind so that I could shift if I had to. And that did work really well. Like I could see from one year to the next, how
okay, so let me ask you this, Denise. If you knew you weren't going to be facilitating that trainer, how would you design it differently?
What I might do is I might preface the entire plan with some commentary, like, okay, you're never going to know your audience until they're in front of you, because each level.
Because they could have had a bad morning, and you get them after that.
Right.
Fighting home, kids are upset. You don't feel good. I mean, and all these things. So I think what you do as you grow in experience with this is you do less over planning. If anything, I mean, I've gotten to the point now in most things, like when I do a keynote for a university or something, I'll have a 5-minute opening and then I just open it up for questions. Because my assumption in most of these is people came there with questions. And I can't really just shotgun across a whole list of things that people might be thinking about. So I take that approach too with trainers and pilots is, okay, what are the things that I already know they know? Because I don't need to revisit those. I'm going to make a point of them. I put them in the background. I may remind them of something. But here are the things that I think I really need to work on. So if they're experienced facilitators, you work on the content. Okay, here's the new content. You may already know it, but this is how we're going to present it in this particular course. So when you teach your apprentices, you teach your folks that are working on certifications or whatever, here are the points that we need to really think about. And you already know your population. There are going to be good, bads, and indifference and all the other things. But as a designer, I step back and I ask myself, what do they need to walk out with? What are the things that are different from what I know they can already do and already know? And that keeps me from over planning, because then I just focus in and I try to take all the noise and the chaos out of it.
That's really wise advice. Of course, coming from you, everything's going to be wise, because I completely, of course, everybody knows, I completely trust and admire your professionalism in this field. Each cohort is so different, and over planning, I found actually worked against me. That's the big lesson I learned.
It does, because you get confused.
Yep.
There's too much. You got 5 gallons of stuff in a 1-gallon container.
Yep. What I found the most helpful and the most useful, and what I think that students would find the most useful as well, is those really lively discussions where everybody shared their experiences, how they overcame them. We worked together as a cohort to figure out best solutions to issues and challenges that they're facing. And that really worked well across the board, across every single cohort, every single class. That was most appreciated, I think. And leaving those.
You know what the next step on that too is that you document it, you capture, document. And so I did a lot of conventions. I did so many conventions. I don't even want to think about how many conventions I've done. Where, as instructional designers, my team was responsible for capturing what was going on in the discussions and whatever. So in this setting, what we did is, at that point, we recorded everything. But then overnight, between day 1 and day 2 or 2 and 3 in a convention, overnight we would put together a synopsis of the discussion points. So here are the things that people said. Here are the key points of this discussion that we had for 2 hours or 3 hours. And one thing I found from the design perspective is, if you capture these whiteboard, have somebody take notes and distribute later, whatever, make sure that the points don't float in the air and disappear. Make sure that you capture them and you distribute those points, and have people capsulize. Okay, how would you say that in one sentence? What you just said over the last 20 minutes. How would you say that in one sentence? Or what is your bullet point? Give me your bullet point. And then not only do we listen to those in real time, then we distribute them later. And if you think about it, Gandhi's not events, what are we doing here? We're doing reinforcement. We're doing application feedback 2 and 3.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't even need to know that because, we're the designers, they're the students. We don't need to encumber them with more nonsense. But from a design perspective, now we're talking about reinforcement, and we're taking things from short-term to long-term, which is what learning is all about. So, a good design point, I think, for people is, okay, capture it, distribute it, let them look at it and think about it later too. Really reinforces your points.
I love that. That is very solid advice, as all your advice is, and something I'm going to take to heart, definitely. So on that same vein, what would your bullet point be for this entire conversation?
I think the conversation is that all of us are transitional in terms of how we look at our work. So whether we're a one-person shop, whether we're working with a team of 100 designers, whether it's a distribution to 10 people or 10,000, there's some similarities along all these lines, but there are also differences. So if you're a one-person shop, be sure to get second opinions. If you're putting together just for distribution, make sure you do a pilot or some other form of run through so that you can make sure that the things that are second nature to you and you think are going to work are actually working, because they don't always. So I think the key takeaway is, don't just design it, actually run through it, tabletop it, pilot it, do something to make sure your product is something that you're going to be proud of and it's going to be effective and efficient.
Indeed. This has been a great conversation, super helpful to me in my, my early years, I would say, as an instructional designer and facilitator.
Yeah, you're an incredible designer.
I've learned so much. I've learned so much from you.
You give me way too much credit. You have terrific instincts and talents, so, as many designers do. So, like I always do in teaching, I just, put the crumbs out there. You follow at your own pace and pick up what works for you.
Indeed. I love it. This was a great conversation. And thank you all for being part of it, for joining in. Be part of the discussion. Ask us some questions. Comment on this. Let's hear your opinion. Let's hear your challenges. Let us know. We'll have some discussions about it.